Hi, I'm Jasmine. I worked with Sam to apply to US MBA programs, and I was thankfully awarded over $300,000 in scholarships. So later this year, I'm heading to New York to go to NYU Stern.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sam Weeks, and I am here today with Jasmine, who was a client last year, and we worked together to apply to lots of different US business schools. And I think, Jasmine, can you start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Jasmine. We've covered that bit. I went to the University of Cambridge and graduated in 2016. Since then, I kind of moved around a bit, did a lot of different things, spent 4 years working at the University of Cambridge in kind of business operations, doing everything from finance to HR to grant applications to sometimes fixing leaks in toilets. And then I spent the last couple of years at a startup doing recruitment. I decided to start applying to MBA programs pretty late, to be perfectly honest. I think it was the 22nd of September last year when I decided, oh, I could apply to MBAs. And then it was the 24th of September when I went to my first MBA kind of information event, which is where I met Sam.
Which is where we met, right?
Exactly. And then it was a big rush, really. And it was a bit of a whirlwind. So I took the GMAT, which I'd never heard of at that point, about a month later. Ended up having to retake a couple of times, but I did get a 740. I should probably also mention that my undergrad GPA was a 2.1 in the UK, which is probably like a 3.5 to a 3.7 in the US, but it was in modern languages, so it wasn't kind of super scientific or anything like that.
Right. And so you mentioned that we met at an event. Like I go to quite a lot of these events. I find them really useful for just to make everything a bit more personal. Otherwise, everything you're doing in MBA applications is online. So it's nice to meet people face to face. How did you find the events, and so what did you benefit from? How do you benefit from, apart from meeting me, obviously?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that the event was completely transformational, really, because like I said, I kind of had this vague idea around late September where I went, oh, I could apply to MBAs. And I had no idea. I'd never heard of the GMAT. I didn't know that there were essays involved. I thought maybe you just sent off like an application that had a personal statement or something like that. I knew nothing. And I didn't know.
Masters, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like a kind of a normal master's in the UK anyway. I didn't necessarily know the difference between US and European MBAs. Obviously, I am European, so I had a little bit more knowledge of that. But actually going there and being able to meet schools in person gave me such a great idea of what the actual programs look like, the kind of things that you might be learning, the kind of ways that you might be learning, because, I'm used to kind of, you sit in the classroom and there you go. I didn't know about these
lectures.
Lectures, exactly. Lectures, seminars, supervisions, that kind of thing. I didn't know about the work that you could do with actual companies, and a lot of different schools had different offers in that sense. And it felt like I really got a sense for different schools and what made them unique and their kind of personality, I suppose. And equally, it gave me the opportunity. Actually, Sam was running like a CV review service there at this event. So people could take along their CV and sit down and sort of have it looked at. I turned up, I didn't even know that I would need a CV for MBA applications. So I didn't have a CV. So I sat with someone else and listened to theirs be scrutinized, and then went home and put together one afterwards.
Right. And so you mentioned being Brit, European. How do you think that played into the MBA application process? Because there's not that many of us Brits when it comes to MBAs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my experience or my knowledge of MBAs, sorry, that was my speaker turning off that I thought I'd already turned off. That was quite an alarming noise. Anyway, my experience of MBAs as a UK citizen who's sort of born and raised, grew up in the UK and everything, was that sometimes maybe it's something that someone does part-time, maybe with something like the Open University, like a distance learning kind of course, which funnily enough, my husband's actually doing now. But that began after I started applying. So yeah, strange kind of, they originated that. Anyway, so that was kind of my impression of what an MBA was. And I think that it's actually been really significant that I am British into the MBA experience. And I think one of the reasons that I was open to going for the full-time route and applying to the US is that I think I've got quite a global perspective. I mean, I studied languages as an undergrad for that reason. And so part of my motivation and part of my thinking around the MBA was that actually this was a bit of a stepping stone to getting out of the UK, maybe not forever, but getting a bit more global experience and being a bit more part of the global scene rather than this little island here. And I think that it made me honestly kind of interesting maybe to some of the admissions committees and certainly for students who I was speaking to, particularly in the US, where apparently the accent's quite charming.
Don't know what you're talking about.
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Because it's like, for me, there's so many different UK accents, but they're always like, oh, a British accent, and I'm like, okay, I've got the one stereotypical one, which is kind of cool.
You sound a bit like the Queen, Jasmin.
Yeah, exactly. I learned that at Cambridge.
Right. So did it have any effect, being British, did it have any effect on the application process in terms of, for example, recommenders?
Yeah, certainly. Because I think that, partly because I was working at a very small startup as I was applying to MBAs. So there were like 80 people and we were split between Canada and the UK. Weirdly, one of my kind of supervisors, someone who I worked very closely with, he was Brazilian, but he'd moved to the UK to do his MBA at Cambridge. So he was the only person I knew with an MBA, and he happened to be my supervisor. So he was a little bit more prepared. But yeah, I get the impression that if you work at particularly a larger company in the US, you're used to, as a manager, kind of having to write these recommendations. But I don't think that any of my colleagues were. So I actually had to do a bit of Reddit research and say, look, what do you say to your recommenders such that you're not having an influence on what they say about you? You're not trying to control that, but you're trying to help them understand what they're even supposed to do. And I think it's helpful. From some schools, they have kind of a set list of questions where it's quite clear what you need to answer, and others just ask for a letter. So I think that those tick box questions were a little bit easier. But what I would say is that I think this is a British thing. We are a people who do not want to brag, or, if you've got a scale and someone says, how good do you think this person is on whatever axis? Good, very good, excellent, phenomenal. As a British person, you'd say, oh, well, of course you couldn't say they were phenomenal because that would be and they're going to think it's not true. Yeah. And then
remove the extremes.
Exactly.
Cut out the extremes.
Exactly. Cut out the extremes. And then maybe even go one lower so that they know you're being genuine, whereas I think from the US perspective, that makes it look like someone is maybe not very good at all if you're not going for the very top tick boxes on that option. So I did worry about that a little bit, and had to say to my recommenders, oh, let's remember this is the US, and maybe being a little bit more positive will be beneficial.
Both in the rankings, but also in what they say, because British people, when they write, we don't like gush in like a positive, like gushing out the compliments. It's very low key because there's a real credibility issue. And by the way, it's you've traveled around Europe, a lot of European countries, it's very similar. Yep. Germans, for example, low key. So if you come from, as an applicant, if you come from a country where people are not as forthcoming as positive as the Americans, for example, then managing your recommenders is super important. As you say, it's something really, really important. There's a cultural gap there that needs plugging.
Yeah, definitely. And then I was wondering, I kind of overanalyzed it and thought, as a US adcom, are you going to know that coming from a European context, that would be different? And I thought, I'm not sure. I'm already throwing a 2-1 at you and all these other like British things. Maybe this one's a step too far. So I think making that clear to recommenders was really important.
Yeah. And again, it just comes back to guiding your recommenders. They're not expected, especially if they haven't done an MBA, they're not expected to know what's involved. So as an MBA applicant, guide your recommenders and make sure that they have at least a framework of things that they should be saying about you. Yeah, I like it a lot. So one of the things that came out of your application process is that you applied to a lot of different schools, everything from sort of mid-tier European programs all the way up to the M7 and the top schools in the US. What were some of your takeaways from the experience? Which are some of the schools that stood out to you? And can you share some of the anecdotes that you got from having researched and visited some of those schools?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the end, I think I put in 6 or maybe 7 applications, one of which was very silly. That was me panicking after I'd finished my round 2 applications, and Sam said, well, if you really want to do something with your time, you could throw an application at this one that's a little bit later. I was like, okay. But I knew nothing about the school. I wasn't really interested at all. But yeah, so I did a lot of research, and I was in a very fortunate position that I had the time and energy to do that. I think it also helped being so intensive with it, because it was literally late September. I'd never heard of GMAT, never mind taking it. Round 2 deadlines of early January. I think that the intensiveness of it made it kind of easier. I think for me, it was always the case that I wanted to be in a city. So that was a way of kind of narrowing down schools. And it was also important to me that schools were not too, I don't really know the word for it, kind of haughty or kind of, full of themselves. I don't know. I did my undergrad at Cambridge. I was like, I've done that. I've done the resting your laurels on your name kind of education. Now I want to do something where people are going to be a bit more real, and it's going to feel a little bit more like it's got a personality. I don't know, and like it suits me as a kind of non-traditional applicant, I suppose. And I think for me, in fact, I'm going to go a step back here. This is going to be a bit of a ramble, but when I first started thinking about MBAs and thinking about applying, I had not been the most career-oriented person between my undergrad and now, for various reasons, mainly centered around the fact my band was here, and it was like, okay, music's my number one thing, and the day job comes second. So I had this impression that as an MBA applicant, I wasn't particularly strong, because I hadn't done consulting, I hadn't done finance, I hadn't worked 80 hours a week in the city, I hadn't moved to New York or London or any of these places. I felt kind of like a small town girl who had a good education, but other than that, had kind of just done some things, So I thought, okay, I'll look at the rankings and I'll target kind of like good schools, but not like the best schools, because that's not going to be for me. So that's where I started, and that's why I went for kind of schools that were ranked maybe like 50 to 100 in the world, and got to know some of those schools. And I've got to say, some of the schools, so for example, ESMT Berlin, which I ended up putting a very last minute application for the January just passed. Thanks for that, Sam. That was a true heroic effort that we did there. But yeah, I felt like they just had these connections in Berlin that felt really genuine to me. It felt like it was a really new school. It felt really current, and the class was small, only 60 people. And that just felt really intimate and kind of personal. And I just thought that was wonderful. And similarly, I weirdly got the same sense from NYU Stern, even though it's a bigger program, much more famous program, much higher ranked in the world. It kind of is more in like the top 20 kind of area. But it felt the same. It felt like, oh yeah, it's part of New York. It's a little bit understated. It's not the one like further up Manhattan. But it feels like everyone here feels very genuine, and connecting with the current students there it just felt like those would be my people. And then, I did have a little moment where I thought, oh, maybe I could be out of the city, and connected with UVA Darden, and similarly just loved the vibes. Went to an in-person breakfast meeting of all things. I'm not a morning person, so that was quite extreme. with their assistant director, I think, of admissions. And that was just, again, it just gave it so much personality, and I felt I could really ask so many questions about the school that, yeah, that felt like, oh yeah, I'd compromise on the city life for this.
So what was it about NYU in the end that sealed it? And I imagine there might have been a financial component to this.
There was indeed a financial component. Funnily enough, I did get an offer from ESMT Berlin to start in January, but that felt very, very soon, given at that point it was already December. I was on a bus in New Orleans on holiday when I got the text, and was like, what? Can I move in a month? Can I sort of visa in a month? So that kind of was out of the question. But funny enough, thinking, okay, NYU Stern is my favorite school, but it's a reach. I still felt like it was a bit of a reach, and I was just thinking, I'll just manage my expectations. But weirdly, it was the first interview that I got from my round 2 admissions. It was super, super quick. And then it was the first offer that I got from my round 2 admissions.
Feels good.
But with a full scholarship. So it just kind of happened and it felt like it was right. And I got a full ride. So all of the fees and all of the compulsory payments also paid for.
It's about $180,000.
Exactly. I think it's 175-ish exactly. So yeah, that was huge. And then by that point, I hadn't even heard back from most of the other schools on whether I had an interview, but I wanted to keep my options open. But ultimately, yeah, it was the biggest scholarship, which was huge for me. To be perfectly honest, I hadn't quite comprehended, kind of internalized just how much the loans to take out would be for the full tuition. And I knew it would be fine and there would be options, but I hadn't really thought about it. So this was kind of a real blessing to get that scholarship. I think also being in New York was huge. I'd visited New York for the first time last year and thought it was just somewhere that I could absolutely be at home. Particularly as a musician, I think that it's really important to me that I don't just become my MBA. You know, I'm gonna be doing that, and I'm also still wanting to sing. So being in New York and having those opportunities was massive. And yeah, they have a lot of events for both prospective students and admitted students. So I felt like I had so many opportunities to get to know the school, get to know the different opportunities involved, the different kind of career prospects that people could have, and the kinds of students who were around. I also listened to every business school's like podcasts that they have. And Stern Chats was just like, oh yeah, this definitely, it's interesting that people seem funny, like, you know, and I connected with a lot of students one-to-one, and they were so welcoming, and I just thought, yeah, I can see myself here. So yeah, I think
so in MBA language then, so and Stern have got a real focus and made a really big push towards EQ. And they have a recommender question, for example. They're one of the only schools to ask, I think the only school to ask about explicitly about your EQ in the recommenders. And so what that translates to in your experience is a community that you felt a part of, and people that you felt you vibed with. And that's something that I tell people, whatever school they're applying to, those are two really, really key things. And it sounds to me like you've exemplified what a good fit for the business school looks like, which is just so nice to see. And one of the things that is also unusual about NYU is that they ask for applicants to submit 6 photos in the famous Pick 6 section. Can you talk a little bit about yours? Because I think they're extremely unique, and I think people would love to get a bit of insight from you on what your pictures look like.
Yeah, absolutely. First, I do just want to tell a quick anecdote about the EQ question that they asked to recommenders. So EQ, anyone who doesn't know, is emotional quotient, I think it stands for, but there's like IQ, which is like your kind of traditional intelligence, whatever that means. And then EQ, which is kind of like your emotional intelligence. And my recommender is a very good friend of mine who I was working with at the time. We were colleagues. And she had come out during that year as a trans woman. And she had said to me when she was writing my recommendation, she said, I've got a lot of examples, and the one that stands out to me is about when I came out as trans, and you were the first person I came out to at work, and you knew that for months, and you helped me transition, and you also kept the secret before anybody knew, and then you helped me, to transition into my womanhood at work. Do you think that's too personal? Do you think I can write about that? I was like, I mean, girl, I don't know, but like, if that feels real to you, but like, write it, let's see what happens. And yeah, I think that really exemplifies how NYU was really interested in you as a person and your genuine emotional intelligence. Yeah, I think that was so poignant. Anyway, pick 6. So yeah, you have to submit 6 photographs, or they say, they can be photographs or infographics or drawings or whatever, 6 images that represent you and your life. And I thought, oh yeah, okay, cool. I love taking photos. I have a lot of photos and have a lot of adventures in my life, so that'll be fine. Great. And I'm very creative, so I thought, yeah, that'll be fine. I ran a few by Sam, and he said, oh, none of these are about work. And I was like, oh yeah, none of these are about work. Okay, I'll think about it again. And then as I was thinking about what the photos that I was choosing meant to me on each axis of my life, for some reason, something that came to me was that they related to kind of themes or like general senses about life and thoughts, reflections on life, I suppose. And the other thing that I felt really related to this and a way that I process these kind of things is through tarot cards. I've actually got my tarot cards right here. They're in a beautiful box that my housemate bought.
Sure.
But yeah, so I have my actual tarot cards right here. And so there we go. Oh, that's a scary one on the top. That's some of them. And I think that a way that I can represent these images of my life, these photographs of my life that show why they're important to me, is I could turn them into tarot cards. So my second draft to Sam was, here are 6 tarot cards that I've made about my life. And I broke the rules a little bit. I don't know if it's a rule exactly or an expectation, but I edited the images to be on cards. Obviously they were all pasted into a PDF, so they weren't literally cards. And I edited some of the imagery from tarot cards onto these photographs. So you have these suits like you have suits in a normal pack of cards. So you have these suits, and I'd edited the images of those suits onto the cards that related to what they were representing. So for example, the 3 of Cups is about community, friendship, the support of your community. And I had an image of the 3 saxophone players in my band, who are, 3 very close friends who we've been through a lot together, and they really support me and we support each other. So I had an image of them with their saxophones, and I put the cups symbols over the saxophones, and then wrote a little sentence about why the 3 of Cups is meaningful to me, why community is meaningful to me. And yeah, did that 6 times, and it was indeed the first question in my NYU interview as well. It started with a very unusual presentation, and I heard it, I was like, oh, he hates it. But clearly didn't hate it.
So I will caveat this with if you're watching, just to emphasize, photoshopping, editing your Pick 6 photos is unconventional. And if you do it, you must understand that it is not strictly, not really what they are looking for. Obviously, your photoshopping was fairly light. It was theming them, but you weren't, for example, changing the people in the photos or anything. It wasn't in any way deceptive, was it?
No, absolutely. It was almost like I was trying to make it almost funny, like how bad it was. It's kind of like, here's a photo, and I've just plonked like cups on it, really like tried to cut out on paint. And credit to Sam, he did say, this is going to be a big risk. I don't necessarily recommend taking that risk. And I was like, do you know what? I'm going to take the risk. I don't know why I got this kind of bullshiness. Said,
but it paid off, right?
Possible. Yeah, and I mean, sometimes the risk works, other times the risk doesn't work. So it depends how safe one wants to play it, I suppose.
And in your case, I mean, not only did you get the admit, you got the full ride scholarship, so that risk paid off in absolutely perfectly. But it wouldn't necessarily work for everybody. And
absolutely,
okay,
it has to be genuine. If you use tarot cards to process your feelings about your life, then great, make tarot cards. If you've never heard of tarot cards, why would you make tarot cards? And that's going to come through. So I think it's just,
and in the interview you would have got pinged on that, and it would have just everything would have fallen apart if it had not been genuine.
Absolutely. Like some people have 6 images that are very work oriented because that's what they focus their time on, and they're very, here's a photo of my keyboard, here's a photo of my mouse. But if that's genuine to you, then fine. I don't necessarily want to hang out with you, but great. So you took an unconventional route in the Pick 6. Do you have any other advice for people, just from your own personal experience? You applied to, as you say, 6 or 7 schools, did a lot of, you visited some of them, you spoke to a lot of people, you've made your decision now to go to New York. You've basically been through the process, start to finish, and come out of it absolutely glowing. What advice would you give to people then who are right at the start of the process and thinking, oh my God, all this ahead of me, what am I going to do? Yeah, I think I have a lot of advice because I feel like I kind of came at it from such a strange perspective. It was all so fast and so unexpected, and so no one knew that I was going to do anything like that. So I feel like that's given me a lot of insight into what not to do as well as what to do. But I think the first thing is have confidence in yourself as yourself. You do not need to go, and I'm going to call out, there's certain internet forums here that are a lot that, you know, like everyone's on there saying, oh, I've got a perfect 800 GMAT and I've got 7 years of perfect work experience and I've been rejected by every school, you know, and it's scary. Like it feels like, oh, I can't possibly measure up to these people, and they're still not even getting admitted. But if you channel yourself, like that's going to show. So it's being genuine and having confidence in what you bring to the table. And like I said, in fact, I completely credit Sam with convincing me to apply to kind of higher ranked schools, because I came along, I emailed him after we met at this event, and I said, here's my CV. I've done it in your template that you have on your website. This was maybe a week later. Here's my CV. I'm applying to these kind of top 50, top 100 schools. What do you think? And then we had a phone call, and his first statement was, I'm going to be brutally honest with you. And I thought, okay, he's going to tell me not to apply to MBAs. I'm going to think of something else to do. Never mind. And he said, you're shooting too low. This is a great profile. I love your profile. Think about somewhere, you know, you could apply somewhere else. And I was like, oh my God, really? I nearly had heart failure. I thought I was going to have to like not do an MBA. So, you know, and once I had that confidence and I could start seeing my own uniqueness and what that would bring to an MBA program, that was so valuable. I think another thing is, don't be afraid to reach out to a lot of people and ask like kind of the most basic questions. Most schools have a list of current students who are some kind of like ambassador, whether they're a particular club that kind of act as ambassadors, or whether they're like kind of in specific roles associated with their scholarship or whatever. But they will have some kind of student ambassadors or student reach out people who you can reach out to. And I was reaching out and saying stuff like, how much is your monthly rent? Or what, you know, before you came here, did you really know what you wanted to do? You know, did you come in and you genuinely knew you wanted to be a consultant or whatever? And I think that it kind of caught a lot of people off guard, but it gave me so much insight. So I'd say that's really important. And finally,
how, may I ask, through what medium?
So usually I would email or send a message on the school kind of website if they had a web form, but they'd usually have like a list of email addresses. So I'd usually email, and my opening email would say, I've got a bunch of questions for you. I've put 5 of them or whatever down below, you know, don't want to overwhelm people. If you like communicating in writing, then I'd love to talk to you via email. If you'd prefer to have a call, I can set something up for, you know, next week, 2 weeks, whatever. And I'd say around 75% of people said, oh yeah, let's jump on a call, and we just kind of set up a Google Meet or a Zoom or whatever and do it like that. Others, we had email exchanges. So one woman who I spoke to, who was actually at Columbia, was Spanish, and I thought, okay, I'll speak to her because she's European like me, and that'll be interesting. And she was emailing me from the plane back from New York to Spain at Christmas. It was Christmas Eve, actually. So, you know, people were so willing to talk to you via whatever. And if you give them the option for it to be via many means, that's really great. I did get the chance to also visit a couple of schools in person. I happened to be in the US earlier this year, like a couple of months ago. I'd already been admitted to Stern, so it was great to go to their campus tour. Knowing that I'd already been admitted, that was great. I did go to another 2 schools actually that week that I hadn't been admitted to yet. One of them I did get subsequently admitted to, but just to get a feel. And in that way, I could then speak to students in person as well, which was so valuable. Yeah, really, really good. So I'd say my final piece of advice there is to, go trust your gut or trust your instinct. You know, there are a lot of great schools out there that can list their median starting salaries and their average GMAT is super high, and, you know, so-and-so rockstar CEO went there or whatever. But if you don't like want to go there, or you think, oh, actually that city is kind of boring to me, or that location is really far from my partner who I want to visit a lot or whatever, you don't have to go there. You can go somewhere else. And there are a lot of schools. There's going to be a school that you like and you vibe with. And if you think somewhere's your dream school and you don't get in, like, you can apply next year, or maybe you can think it wasn't meant to be and there will be somewhere else, you know? So I think that connecting with a school and feeling like you're going to be at home, I think is going to be really important. I say that now. We'll check back with me in 6 months and see how that's actually gone. But
I look forward to it. I hope we can do a catch up when you've had a bit of time in New York and you've done maybe your first year at NYU and you're midway through it and you're in the depths of recruiting and pulling your hair out and
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be great.
you've got all that to look forward to. It'll be great. It'll be really nice. Look, Jasmin, thank you so much for your time. Really, really just lovely to catch up with you and lovely to hear your story. And I hope that through this process, you've learned not just about the business schools, but maybe a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your priorities and what matters to you. And if so, then everyone's a winner. It's absolutely brilliant.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think applying for MBAs is an incredible exercise in self-reflection. And your friends will both be sick of you and thrilled at all the exciting things that you're doing. Because yeah, you want to talk to people about it and you kind of share things with them as you go. Like when I made my tarot cards, I was sending them to all my friends being like, am I okay? Do you like this? You're on this photo. What do you think? Most of them love the fact that we're in our tarot card. But you know, I think it's an incredibly self-reflective time and it really helps you to kind of hone in on what you care about and who you are, which is something I never expected. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I look forward to hearing from you in maybe a year's time and best of luck in New York.
Thank you very much.
Amazing. One last thing. Can I get a high five?
Yes.
Fantastic. Take care.
Thank you.
See ya.